There are some samples of willow honeydew up here, if you really want to check your taste buds. Well, good afternoon. The small part that I have in this program is to look at some of the impacts of the giant willow aphid on honeydew for beekeeping. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-author on this paper, Terry Braggins, for his help and enthusiasm in trying to get to the core of the problem. So the first part of this is a little bit of an analysis of Paul Badger's white crystals. If you heard the session from Bryce yesterday, he was going on about white crystals. Well, this is what he was finding. This is what Paul was finding in his frames back in 2014. This comb had been put through the usual extraction process and then put out as wet. And then when he came to look at it, he found these white crystals all through it. So what was going on? Barry Foster put a monitoring sheet under his hive early on in the year and found he had these white crystals all over the outside of the frame, which is just where the bees would have been cleaning out the honey for that current year. This is the normal kind of brood renewal here. So what was going on? We sent a copy of these crystals or a sample of these crystals to Terry. He happened to have a bona fide willow honey sample collected early in the year, and then he was able to compare that sample with the sample we had sent him. Now, on this chromatogram, you can see the fructose and the glucose peaks. I should probably put my glasses on, I won't screw up too badly. But when you have a look at the honeycomb sample that I sent him from Paul's hives, you can see just one whacking great big peak of a melissitose sugar. And I'll describe the difference between these two sugars, in a moment. The literature showed us that honey made from willow nectar early in the season has certain properties, and they can be compared with the honeydew properties that are found later in the year. Color is a very interesting one. That is the transmission of light through the sample, and you can see that the samples are pretty dark, not much light gets through. The phenols are doubled, and the cyanuric acid is increased 8 times in the honeydew honey, and the salicylic acid shows up in fairly great quantities in the honeydew honey. Salicylic acid you will recognize as being a component of the aspirin that many people take, and the acetyl salicylate, but you'd have to eat 2 kilograms of this honey to get the equivalent of what's in one small 80 milligram aspirin. And some of the aspirins go up to 800 milligrams. And I hate to think how much honey you'd have to eat for that lot. Cyanuric acid is very prominent. I won't dwell on that here. Aphids, we always think of aphids as sucking insects. Yes, they certainly do suck, especially early in the season when they're trying to get the nutrient out of the cortex on the bark. But their objective is to get that nice, great big long mouth part right through the cortex and into the transpirational tissues and especially the phloem. And when they get their very long stylets into the phloem, then there's a positive pressure of several atmospheres that pushes the sap back up the stylets and into their mouth. So from then, they're no longer suckers, they're gulpers. And you can watch this going on, and they gulp, 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 and on the end of the abdomen, there's a little clear droplet occurs, and that droplet gets bigger and bigger, then finally blows off, and it keeps doing it. It's absorbing the proteins out of that material, about 50% of them, but importantly, it's the sugars that we see the major effects on. The sugar that comes out of the willow is primarily sucrose, and sucrose only. It can come out on a cut stylet. If they cut the stylet, they can get a cubic millimeter, which is very, very tiny, cubic millimeter per day out of that, per hour. But multiply that to 25 for the day, multiply that by the millions of aphids, and you've got a pretty big drain going on your tree. So when the sucrose goes through the aphid digests it and breaks it down into glucose and fructose, right? So that's what the G and F mean. The sucrose is a disaccharide. But then for some reason best known to the aphid, or probably not even known to the aphid, it sticks one of the glucoses back on the sucrose that was coming through the system to make a trisaccharide, melizitose, which is the white crystal that we've been talking about. That is not nutritious to the bee. It can't digest it. Bees could digest sucrose all right, and they can invert it. But the melizitose as a trisaccharide is not a useful food for the bee. Now, some of the work from Terry's lab showed these rather interesting figures. If you look at the fructose level, this is grams per 100 grams, so this is percentage. So the 4 WHs along the top there are willow honey samples of various strings collected from several collaborating beekeepers in the Gisborne district, and Terry included the Manuka honey as well. So you can see that the willow honey is, 26, 20, 30, fairly low. Manuka, 39.8. Glucose, on the other hand, 16, 21, 20, pretty low, 29 in Manuka. There's very little sucrose left in the honeydew, but the melizitose can be quite large. 17, 11, 16, etc., but there's hardly any in Manuka, thank goodness. Now, the interesting thing is if you add up all the sugars, you find that they come out at 63, 62, 66, 66, 69%. So, we worry about sugar in our diet, and here's our favorite honeys running almost 70% sugar at us. But that's all right. It's in a good form, and it's natural, and it's healthy. Yes, we hope. Now, the interesting thing is that as an indicator of just how much honeydew has gone into the hive, one of the best indicators is the salicylic acid. And you can see the second brown dot there from the left. That's a very high level of 40. This is in one of Bill Savage's hives up in the, I think it was, that was in the Aria Valley. Now, that's a fairly high amount, and it was matched by a very high amount of melizitose sugar, so it was a good indicator. But there's one thing about melizitose, it's not very soluble, only 14 to 16% soluble. So this means that if there's any more than that in the honey, by the time it's been conditioned and dehydrated by the bee, it's got nothing else to do but to crystallize out. And that's why you get the sugar crystals in the honey. So you can see that the blue symbols indicate the melizitose, and you can see most of them are just all around the same sort of level, but it's the salicylic acid which really shows us a great variation. This one here is very low, low proportion. It was just below the solubility level, and there was no melizitose that showed up in this sample. For those of you from the Waikato who may have heard me at Matangi, I got a sample from the Lorimers, and their sample had 30 milligrams per kilogram of salicylic acid in it, and the sample produced a nice, healthy bunch of sugar crystals. And you can taste them. I'll give you tasting sticks afterwards, and you can have a go at it if you want. Now, in my extractions, the way I do it is I scrape the sealed comb off the frame, put it into a stainless steel bowl, put it in a water bath, bring it up to 75 degrees, then leave it to overnight to cool off. All the wax and bits of bee and everything else float to the top and are caught in that top layer, and then I can take off the various layers. And so coming through from the left, there's 3 bottles of honey, and 3.1, 3.2 of that. There's the pottle of wax from the top, and then there's that lump of melizitose that I got out of my filter. And beekeepers know a lot about the lumps out of the filter. I had 2 samples given to me from the Tiki Tiki area, thanks to Willie Carr on this one. And if you just follow through the numbers on that table, it's basically a 2,000 gram or 2 kilogram sample. The wax that came off was 330, 480. And then I filtered it, and I could filter 1125 grams off, or 1170, and then there was the solid residue. So if I had that solid residue, that was the solid crystals that were already formed. That meant I had saturated solutions, so then I could take 14% of that saturated solution, and at the end could calculate that the reduction in food that was available to the bee out of that hive was reduced by 31%. So when the beekeeper gives the hive a heft at the end of fall or autumn, and says, "Oh, this is good heavy food," you've got to be careful what kind of material is in there, because it may be fooling you a little bit. Did a similar thing with the samples that I was fortunate enough to get from the Lorimers in the Waikato. You can see how black that honey looked in the beginning. Doesn't look quite so black now. It seems to have lost a little bit of its color, or the lights are very bright, one or the other. And again, we're able to take the wax off the top, but I found that having taken the wax off the top, the honey was so clean and clear underneath, I didn't need to worry about filtering it. I could decant it, and then the melisotose was just stuck in the bottom of the container in a big glob, and then I was just able to take it out with a teaspoon and put it into there. But it gave me the same kind of numbers. And when I looked at the reduction in the amount of usable stores that were available for the bees, they were reduced by 30%. So this is a pretty heavy tax on the food supply that we're hoping to get in for the bees. At the operational level, Willie and his extracting plant down in Gisborne had 80 honey supers that were submitted for extraction. Now, one of the things Willie and I have done over the years is weigh lots and lots of honey supers. We know that the hardware inside a honey super is about 6.5 kilograms. So he weighed all the supers and then took off the 6.5 kilograms per super and said, right, I should get something like 1,309 kilograms out of this lot. When he reweighed the frames after he put them through the centrifugal spinner, there was still holding 400 kilograms of material, mainly the crystalline melisotose material. So only 70% of the honey was extractable under the normal machinery, and the melisotose was 30% of the initial weight. Now, in addition to the problem of loss of honey per se, the filter cleaning proposition in the plant was a little bit rugged. Normally they can get through 80 supers and have that all done and then clean their filters, if it's regular Manuka honey, for example. But for the honeydew honey, they had to stop and clean them every 7 supers. There was just that much crystalline material clogging everything up. So that's one of the really big challenges that are there right now. What we don't know is what the beneficial parts of this could be. The aphids that feed on conifers in the Black Forest in Germany produce a honey that is really quite popular in that area. And it's a very similar kind of reaction between between an aphid and the conifer, and producing a honeydew that can be collected by the bees. Perhaps there is something that could happen to this as well on the beneficial side, if somebody wants to do the analysis. We need to keep the willows in good health, though. We need them for pollen and nectar supplies in the spring to build up our hives. The large numbers in late summer make for large amounts of willow honeydew that is collected by bees and wasps. We've heard about that a lot. Sooty mold is a sure sign of the willow aphid. And I've already warned you that the hefting of hives may be giving you a 30% overestimation of the food supplies that are available to the bees. Now, it's been a pleasure to work with both with the beekeepers in Gisborne and with the Scion and Poplar and Willow Trust people. I'd like to thank Paul Badger, Barry Foster, Wiremu Carr, Jane Lorimer and Bill Savage for access to honey supplies, and to also say big thanks to Scion and Poplar Willow Trust people for getting on and doing something about this, even though MPI had decided in their wisdom to do one of their favourite standing downs. So thank you very much. And if you want to taste this honey in question time, you're welcome. I'll bring some sticks. Thank you. Any questions or additions to the story?
Yes, John, have you noticed any difference between willows and poplars with the occurrence of the milazotized sugars?
The rise in?
The difference between willows and poplars, is it significant that milazotized sugars are released by the aphid or from the tree, and therefore a difference between trees will give you different milazotized sugars?
I've only worked with the willows, and that's the material that comes out of the literature on that. I'm not totally aware of what comes out of a poplar yet. That's probably the next one. Yes.
Hi John, thanks for your talk. I just wanted to ask about human metabolism of melanocytosis. Do you know if it can be broken down and metabolized by humans? Because if not, you might have a interesting product here as a low-calorie sweetener.
I'm not quite sure. The 13%, the 13 to 17% that will stay in the honey anyway, you can taste the sugar and see if you think it's very sweet. I think the willow honeydew honey is not bad, but the other one's not so sweet. And it's a hard thing to digest. The bees can't digest it, and it doesn't crack down very easily. It crunches. That's about the only thrill you can get out of eating it, I think.
Yes, could you tell me whether the bees, after a while, having all this melastose crystals in the combs, do they take it out eventually?
They clean it out, yes. That was what was on the testing board.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, they have to throw it out of the comb before the queen will lay in it. She won't lay in it while there's crystals in there.
And what about where the honeycombs are? Will they take it out of there too or not?
When it comes to the time to restore them, I think they will be cleaning that out as well.
Oh, very good, thank
I
you.
haven't gone into the hive to actually look at that, but I
thank
think
you.
they have to. Yep.
Yeah, silly question, but is there any chance that this aphid could jump host and get on the toot bushes? That would be a nightmare for us.
I agree. I would not want to see it on a toot bush. I have no idea. What do you reckon, Stephanie? Do you reckon they could jump to a toot bush?
I don't know that it would jump to that bush, but it has been reported on some apple trees.
Crab
hearing
apples.
a few, yeah.
Yes.
Also, we had one example submitted to our diagnostics lab of it on a coprosma. It didn't seem to be doing very well at all. It was a very unhealthy looking population, but still there were several individuals that appeared to be feeding on the coprosma.
Okay. Thanks.
Stephanie, if we've got those 3 ladybirds that you said that are already, I guess, parasitoids, are we looking at introducing the new parasitoid too early? I mean, should we be waiting to see how well those do to control before we bring something in from overseas?
The ladybirds are actually predators, not parasitoids, so they're generalist feeders. They don't tend to be present in enough numbers generally to have large impacts on a population the way that a parasitoid could, that's targeting only that aphid. It could have some effect. It could perhaps be something that assists the parasitoid program. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's time up. You all right?
You have another form. If anybody else wants more questions or would like to try the honey, come on up. You've got 3 minutes.
No, 3 minutes? Well, you leave that till question time, and don't we have a regular question time? And then I've got some sticks we can use as well.
It's working. I don't know who this question is to, but how generalized with host jumping? How generalized is the giant willow aphid in the other countries? Is it only on the willow? Is that why it's got that name? Or you know, I mean,
It's certainly why
is
it's,
there a big fear that it's going to jump around and get on
it's certainly
other
got
things?
why it's got the name Linda, because people like Mittler and others who did their thesis on it about 60 years ago were getting it all off willows and growing the willows. It does go on to poplars, it does go on to, it's being recorded on crabapples, and at the population levels as they are at the moment, I'm sure that it'll be trying other things as well.
So I've had a really good look at the literature on giant willow aphid, and in general only seen reports of it on willows and poplars. I did read one citation of it on apple trees in the States. It was a really old reference from the 20s or 30s, and I didn't actually believe it until I heard that we've seen some on apples here in New Zealand.
Okay then, thank you, Michelle.